The Master of Hestviken by Sigrid Undset. Translated from the Norwegian by Arthur G. Chater. Book 4. The Sun Avenger. Part 2. The Sun Avenger. Chapter 1. Midsummer was gone before Eirik was able to visit his home at the Ness. Across the bogs the sunshine blazed on the shining leaves of the osiers, and the new blades of grass were agleam in the little tussocky meadows. The lake reflected the woods on the other side, and the warm blue sky and the clouds, which were already turning to gold. It was the end of the day. As he approached the gate of the paddock, a scent of new-mown hay was wafted toward him. Eirik dismounted, but paused for a moment before opening the gate. The rays of the evening sun were yellow as gold, and the cluster of little houses on the Ness threw long shadows over the meadow, where Eldred and old Runhild were spreading hay. His wife had seen him. She put down her rake and came to meet him. She walked so lightly and erect, bare-legged in her working clothes. Eirik thought once more that he knew nothing finer than Eldred's forehead above the great eye sockets and the rounding of the cheek, although the face was brown as wood, the skin drawn tight over the bones, and she had deep furrows right across her brow, many wrinkles about the great eyes, and cracks in her rough lips. Never had he felt so intensely that here was the home he would have chosen. He liked best to dwell in the forests. This was the last time he would come home to this place. But it was not that he thought with any regret of the destiny which was now bearing him away from here. At one time he had loved Hestviken so that it sent a tremor through mind and sense if he did but come near anything that belonged to his home. Now he loved Hestviken because the manor needed him. The old folk looked to him and expected him to take control as master. He was the brother who was to care for Cecilia and her children, and he was the son, bound to stay by the old man who lived on, stricken and swathed in his dumbness and mysterious calamity, as in a cloak of darkness. Man and wife gave each other their hands in greeting. But their manner was the same as if Eirik had ridden from home the day before. Eldred asked how his sister fared now, and Eirik answered, well. And Olav? There was no change, said Eirik. As soon as he saw that it would be long before he himself could come home, Eirik had sent Svein Ragnarsson over to the Ness. The young man had told Eldred all he knew of what had taken place at Hestviken in the spring, and it did not occur to Eirik to tell his wife any more, or even to inquire how much she had heard. He lay awake that night and felt how securely Eldred slept in his arm. He was glad he should be at home for a while in their own house, before they had to move out to Hestviken and live in the same house as his father. He remembered full well that their life together had begun in a flame of passion, when they had rushed into each other's arms as though each would devour and suck the other dry. A change had come over them by degrees, and now they lived together as if the hunger and thirst of both were appeased. Eldred was the first human being he had known, with whom he felt so safe that he could hold his peace. It had been so from the very first days, before they were married. Nay, from the days when he was a newcomer here, and never had a thought that she was to be his. Not even then had he been tempted to talk wildly and at random, or to assert himself noisily, when he was in Eldred's company. These were not new thoughts. He simply felt that with her he had enjoyed silence, calm like that of the forest, and freedom. The bond that bound him to her was the first to which he had submitted without feeling the strain. He had seen Gunhild again at church one day in spring. Ah, yes, surely she was fair. Like a bell cow with her jingling jewels, honest and capable she looked. But they had not been suited to each other after all. He was thankful to have gotten a wife of whom he would not tire. He did not reflect upon what Eldred might have found in him. He saw her calm demeanour, watched her sleeping securely by his side, and that was enough for him. He and Svein mowed the grass on the marshes during the next few days. At evening he rode out with Eldred and set the nets. During the midday rest he lay on the green by the wall of the house, and most of the household did the same. Eirik listened to the two old folk and chatted with them. Holgeir seemed well pleased that he and Eldred were leaving the place. When Svein married and came hither, Holgeir would be more of a man at the Ness, being the mistress's kinsman. Eldred wished to take Ragnhild with her. The woman was in two minds about it. Now she would go with her mistress, and now she would not. Young Svein slept with his cap over his eyes. Eldred sat a little apart, mending a garment or spinning. Eirik said to her one day when they were alone, "'Tis no easy lot I have in store for you at Hestviken, Eldred. There you will find much that is not well." But he said nothing of what the difficulties were. It was long since Eirik had thought of speaking to anyone of the difficulties that might await him. Perhaps he had never done so. But formerly he had tried to deaden his own feelings with talk and with fussing about other things. Now he had taught himself the calmness with which one must go to work if one would unravel a knot. It was terrible to see his father in such a state, but he dared not show that he felt it, dared not even show him special care or affection. In the man's present plight, this would only add to his torment. Olav had been almost entirely paralysed in one side when he came to himself. Little by little he recovered sufficiently to be able to walk, but he was bent quite over on the left side. He could just move his arm, but could not control it, and the scarred and ravaged face was now quite distorted and awry. When he tried to speak, it was almost impossible to catch a word. His lips only gave out a babbling. But now he no longer tried. One day, about a month after Eirik had brought him home to Hestviken, he made signs that he wished to be shaved of the ragged white beard that had grown over his face. Apart from that, Eirik saw how it hurt Olav to be obliged to accept help. He was always making impotent attempts to do without it. But he made an ugly mess of his beard when eating. That was the reason. As far as Eirik could tell, his father's understanding was not darkened. Perhaps it would have been easier if it had been. When Olav lay sick at Oslo, Father Finn Arnvidsson had said he would give him extreme unction and the viaticum if his life were in danger. He had proved his will to confess his hidden sin. But if he was destined to recover and live for a time with the seal of this secret doom upon his lips, then let no man venture to think there are limits to God's mercy, or that he can fathom God's mysterious counsel. As a king receives his faithless liege man back into his friendship, but bids him dwell a while outside the court until he be sent for, so must Olaf await with manly patience a sign from our Lord. Eirik had lodged with his own brethren during the last days at Oslo. There he made his confession to brother Stefan and took counsel with him. And next morning, when he went forward and received Corpus Domini, he prayed, O God, thou who art King of kings and eternal love, no king of this world, be he never so hard, refuses a son who would ransom his father. Rather will he take the son as his father's hostage. Lord, look not upon my sins, but look upon thy son's sacred wounds, and have compassion upon my poverty, that my offer may find favour in thy sight, that I may do penance in his stead, as my father should have done." Brother Stefan said that he too must wait for a sign. One of the greatest difficulties was that Cecilia could scarcely bear to look at her father, and Eirik guessed that affection had little part in the horror she felt for him. No one could fail to see that Cecilia had rallied and grown younger again since her husband was no more. She had grown so fair in these 3 months of widowhood. It was as though she had been stifled in a dungeon. What she had said when her father would force her to lay her hand on the corpse was not true. And well that it was not, thought Eirik. It would have been dreadful had it been so with her after the ugly death that came upon Jorund. She was a faithful mother to her 2 little sons. The second boy, Torgils, was still at Ringel, where the old people would not let him go. Kolbein was now 6, and Audun 3 winters old. They were handsome and healthy children, obeyed their mother like lambs, and held her in high honour. But among the folk of the manor they were full of sport and high spirits, and when they came to know their uncle they followed at his heels wherever he went. They were not at all afraid of their grandfather, Eirik saw. They scarcely noticed him. Early in the autumn Eirik came again to the Ness, and this time it was to bring his wife home to Hestviken. There was a diversity of opinions among folk when Eldred Bursesdatter came back to the country where she had lived in her youth, and took her place as mistress of one of the greatest manors. But for the most part they thought it was well. True, she had done much that was ill, but that was very long ago. It was right that she should be taken out of the humble cot in which she had lived for 15 years, and restored to such condition as became her birth. Her kinswomen, the daughters of Arn and their families, received her, Una and Torgrim cordially, Bard and Signy more coolly, but in very seemly fashion. She was still a handsome woman, and carried herself so well when she mixed among folk that those who were old enough to recall Eldred's beauty at the time she was given to old Harold Johnson revived the memory of that marriage, and many there were who could tell tales of her evil courses when she was mistress of Borg, and later at Sigurdstadt in a different way. Now she was an elderly woman, nearing the 100, but she and Eirik were not so ill-matched a pair to look at, for all that. He was so big and bony that he began early to look more than his age. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stooped a little with his bulky chest and long, powerful limbs, and his back was rounded by hard work. His thin and narrow face, with its indented nose and prominent jaw, was brown, tanned and furrowed. Though no one would have called him ugly, it was not easy to see that he had once passed for a comely youth. Only the great light brown eyes were unusually handsome. But his dark and curly hair was strongly marked with grey. With the passing of years, Eirik Olafsson had grown very like his father, folk said. Not so much in outward appearance. The tall, dark, rather loose-limbed man had indeed remarkably little in common with the father, who had been so fair-complexioned, shapely and well-knit. But folk could clearly recognise the father's nature in the son. Like him, Eirik was taciturn. They were also in that family. As Olaf in his time could stand quite motionless by the hour together on the lookout rock, or leaning over the fence of a cornfield, so the son now stood gazing in the same places. But he was a much more capable master of Hestviken than Olaf had been. Not that the father's management had been other than careful and wise. The family estate had not shrunk in his time. But with the son everything went with more life and spirit, and success attended him. The manor of Saltviken, which had been left untenanted in Olaf Halfpriest's time, had been reclaimed, and he had helped the young folk whom he had established at Rundmere to clear the land around. He had brought Liv and her remaining children south to a house in Saltviken. It was indeed a better abode than the woman was used to. Nevertheless, she was loath to leave her cot. But Eirik said it was better that Anki's children should live farther from Hestviken when Jorun's sons grew up. Anki had seized a chance of escaping from the men who were to carry him bound to the warden. In the first 2 years, rumours were heard from time to time that the murderer had appeared, now here, now there, on the outskirts of the parish and in the neighbouring country. He must have a haunt somewhere in the forests. And when Liv had a child 1.5 years after the disappearance of her husband, she gave out that he was the father. He had looked in at home a few times. In the 3rd spring after Jorun's death, 3 men of the parish were taking a short cut through the woods on the way to Gardar. Close to the Black Tarn they found in a scree the remains of a corpse, badly mangled by beasts. But one leg in a boot had been caught fast among some stones. The men then searched the forest around, seeking for traces of the dead man's hiding place, for they guessed him to be a robber. And sure enough, they found a little way up the hill a kind of hut built on a ledge of rock. It looked as if the man had not been so badly off there. The couch was well covered with clothes, and a great food box stood there, still half full of food. Now there was one of the men who thought he had seen that box before. The low, flat carving of interlacing vines looked like the work of Eirik Olafsson of Hestviken, and there were runes cut on the pin that held the lid in place. One of the men was scholar enough to make out what was written. It was Eirika. Then it occurred to them that they had seen Eirik of Hestviken wearing boots that were patched in just the same way as the one the corpse had on. They got Aunt Ketel's remains up to the village, and the murderer was lain in earth just outside the churchyard wall. Then they carried what they had found to Hestviken, and told Eirik the news. The thrall was true to his nature, a thief to the last. Anki did not steal these things, said Eirik. He fixed his great clear eyes on the peasant who had spoken. Thrall or thief, he avenged son and daughter in such a way as he was able, and it is for God to judge how great was his sin. No one sought to find out more. If Eirik Olafsson had secretly helped the slayer of his brother-in-law, that must be his affair. The Hestvik men had always shielded their dependents, even when they were in the wrong. It came out afterwards that he had caused masses to be said for Anki. Ah, yes, the dead man might well need that. They had always been good Christians there, and open-handed with arms. Olaf had been generous while he was master, and Eirik was the same. But Olaf always seemed to listen to the woes of poor folk with but half an ear, and in helping them looked as if he were thinking hard of something else. Eirik said loans must be given with a laugh, and gifts with a joyful countenance. Though he was not much more of a talker than his father, one could see that he listened to what folks said. There was nothing oppressive in his silence. In every way he was more friendly than the old man had been. The day after these men had been with him, Eirik rode south to Saltviken. He wished to give Liv the news himself. Before setting out for home, he went up to the manor to find Cecilia. He knew that she had not yet held her churching, and she still kept to the same upper chamber where she had sat with her father on the night when she had fetched him home from the Ness. The spring sun shone in through the 3 small bayed lookholes, and fell straight upon the woman's coiffed head. She sat upon a low chest, bent over the sucking child. When her brother came in at the door, she looked up and smiled in greeting. But her eyes went back at once to the newborn boy at her breast. She looked young and thoughtful and happy. Her face had grown rounder, but her eyes were clear, and her lips had recovered their bright red hue. She listened calmly to her brother's account of Aunt Ketel's death. "Ah, that was bound to be the end," she said sorrowfully, "since he never would follow your advice and take himself away from here." Then she asked after Kolbein and Audun and Eldred, also after her father. But all the time she was looking down at the child, who now lay full-fed and asleep in her lap. Eirik was strangely moved to see this mild and blissful animal look in the young mother's eyes. She had never been like this when she sat with her other children. She was fond of them. She had made clothes for them and sent them across during the winter with a message that when she was over her childbed they might come and visit their mother. But he guessed it was something new with this little Gunnar. Him she had borne under a cheerful heart. Una came in with ale and food for the guest. She had grown older and more portly, but was as cheerful and active as ever. She went over to Cecilia, had to look at the child. It half opened its eyes, and at once the two women were delightedly busy over the little thing. Una took the boy in her arms and brought him over. Eirik must take a good look at him. She unswathed the back of the little head. Was it not finely shaped? Yes, it is a goodly child, said Eirik. But he has red hair, he laughed teasingly. Cecilia looked up. Her cheeks flushed deeply, and her brother saw she was on the point of flying into a rage. But then she laughed too. Certainly he has red hair. 'Tis as I say. My Gunnar has every fine thing you can think of. She came over and took back the child. Eirik said he could not wait till Aslak came home. But give him my greeting. Cecilia Olavsdatter had not been a widow more than a year when a suitor announced himself. It was Ranvald Johnson, the friend of Olaf's youth. He had been out and tried his fortune at Hestviken before, when the two young maids were there. First it was Botild Askersdatter he would have, and then Cecilia. Nothing came of it. Then he took a wife who brought him an estate at the head of the fjord, and there he dwelt now, a widower with two little daughters. Cecilia was not unwilling. She had known Ranvald from childhood, and he was upright, kind, and a fine man to look at, even if there were many men wiser than he. And Eirik could see no cause to refuse him, if Cecilia herself desired this marriage. He guessed it was a little hard for his sister to have to share her authority with Eldred. The two women liked each other. They associated without friction. But the fact was that Cecilia had held sway as mistress of her father's manor for the greater part of her grown-up life, and now Eldred had to take precedence of her. She was so much older, and she was his wife. But he didn't doubt that Cecilia longed above all to escape from the proximity of her father. When Eirik laid Ranvald's suit before Olaf and gave his own opinion, his father nodded assent, and so he and Ranvald came to terms. The betrothal ale was to take place during the summer. At Botolf's Mass, Cecilia herself went into Oslo to make purchases for the feast. But on the evening of her return, Eirik saw, as soon as his sister stood up in the boat, that something had happened. "What is it?" he asked, as he helped her onto the quay. "That I will tell you later." Change after change came over Cecilia's face, usually so unruffled. She seemed to be listening, with a youthful, far-away look in her eyes. Then her features contracted in mournful brooding. Eirik was about to see his father to his bed. Eldred was already bending down to loosen her shoestring when Cecilia came in upon them. "Stay a while, father. There is a matter I would like to have disposed of this evening, so I beg you will listen to me now." "No, don't go, Eldred. I wish you to hear it too. It is this. I cannot marry Ranvald." "You cannot?" Eirik turned round to his sister. "He has our word already, Cecilia." "I know it, but he must release us." She looked at her father, and he looked at her with his one ice-blue, bloodshot eye. The other was half closed by the palsied lid. "You remember Aslak Gunnarsson, father? John Torreson, he called himself, the winter he was with us. I met him in the town. He had heard that I was now a widow, and he was on his way hither. He has not married, and now I have promised myself to him." Eirik saw that his father was attacked by the spasms which sometimes occurred in the dead side of his face and the palsied arm. "You have promised yourself to 2 men?" He checked himself and said quietly, "It is far too late to speak of this tonight. Let us wait until tomorrow." "There is no need of much speaking. It is true that I have promised myself to 2 men, but only one can have me, and that will be Aslak." "But father and I have given our word to 1 man. We did so with your consent, and we will not break our word. Once I have been married on the advice of you 2. The green flash that came into her eyes seemed no more than a reflection, but it reminded Eirik of the time when he had believed his sister capable of killing her husband. "I shall never give Ranvald my troth, and if you will not betroth me to Aslak, I shall go northward with him in spite of you." "You must not say such things, Cecilia. You have 3 sons. "Yes, I have thought of that. But they must stay with you. They are your heirs. What do you say, Eldred?" She turned to her brother's wife. "I say that no good can come of breaking one's word. But it is not good either to marry against one's will. You ought to wait a while. Aslak and I have waited long enough. What do you say, father? Don't you think we have waited long enough now?" Olaf nodded. "Father!" exclaimed Eirik. "Do I understand you rightly? Do you wish to withdraw from the bargain with Ranvald?" Olaf laid his sound hand heavily on his son's arm and nodded again. "So, if that is the way of it, then you are the master, father." Not much more was said of the matter. Eirik had to ride to Ranvald and tell him of the turn it had taken. At first Ranvald was very angry, but before long he said it was all one about the marriage. If Cecilia has made up her mind to a thing, I am loath to be the one who would try to force her away from her purpose. So it was not Ranvald who came out to Hestviken at St. Olaf's vigil, but Aslak Gunnarsson. As the guest dismounted and came toward him, Eirik saw that Aslak halted a little. The brother felt a light shock, of aversion, or he knew not what. They were betrothed in the course of the autumn, and the wedding was held at Hestviken in the following spring. By that time Jorund had been dead 2 years. Aslak had no home of his own, but lodged with his brothers at Iterdal. He bought up horses from the districts where the farmers carried on the breeding of foals, sold them in Oslo and along the border. He was now a man of substance, and owned shares in many farms in the uplands, but liked none of them so well that he would live there. So it was arranged that he and Cecilia should live at Hestviken. Eirik and Aslak lived together in amity and concord. The new brother-in-law was prudent and upright, an active and companionable man. Eirik saw that. But it could never grow into any warm friendship between the 2 men. They both knew that. And when Aslak and Cecilia had been married over half a year, Aslak came and said he thought they might as well move to Saltviken, for in any case he or Eirik must constantly be there to see to the work of the farm. And here at Hestviken they were already so many, and now that Cecilia was with child, Eirik guessed that the 2 would be glad to enjoy their happiness in a place where they would not be reminded of all the past mischances, and where Cecilia could be mistress in her own house, and need not have her father before her eyes. So he and Aslak were soon agreed. Eirik thought of all this as he came down from the upper chamber, and remembered his sister's face as she sat bending over the child she had had by Aslak. And he remembered the day in late autumn when they moved out hither. He had sailed them round himself. It was raining heavily, and the road between the fences was under water in places. Aslak lifted up his wife and carried her right up to the manor, though her feet were already as wet as they could be, and the man was lame, though not so badly. And he remembered the blaze of anger in Cecilia's eyes when he once happened to mention Aslak's defect. "He got it fighting 1 against 5. At last a man threw him from behind, so that he broke his leg." He did not believe there had been a shadow of truth in Jorun's talk. It was not like her, nor like Aslak either. With this man, his sister was in good hands, and the manor was in good hands. He would have liked to go up to the stream and look at the mill Aslak was building. He was tired of carrying his corn round to Hestviken by boat, he said. But he felt he never had any desire to seek out his brother-in-law, though they were always good friends when they met. He liked Aslak and thought well of him, but there was no help for it. He had said to Eldred one day, "I don't know what it is, but when I am in company with Aslak, it always comes over me that the man finds life irksome." "That is likely enough," said his wife with a kind of smile, "but I do not believe he finds it so irksome as you do." Eirik looked at her in surprise. "No, you are right there," he replied with a laugh. He went over to the cherry orchard and looked at it. The first cuttings he had planted were now trees with stems as thick as a child's arm and glossy bark. Ground shoots had come up all about them. The little plantation was full of yellow buds ready to burst. In time there would be a whole grove here, as in the convent garden. He rode homeward in the course of the afternoon. On the shore, before one rounds the point of the lookout crag, there is a little strip of sandy beach below the rust-red rocks. Eirik saw that his father stood there with his little bow. He was struggling with it once more, trying if he could train himself to use his half-palsied arm and hand. It hurt Eirik anew whenever he saw that Olav could not give up. Again and again he attempted to conquer his disability. He lived in continual anxiety for his father when the stricken old man was wandering out alone. Far away over the high ground to the south he dragged himself. The housefolk had seen him sitting there looking down into Saltviken. But when Eirik asked if he should sail him out thither one day so that he could have a sight of the manor, Olav shook his head. Round the whole bay he walked, up Ferndal or along the ridge of the Bull. He might easily fall over the edge, or have another stroke, lie there and perish. But Eirik dared not send anyone after him to keep an eye on the old man. He had seen that nothing would distress his father more, and he must be left to go his own way. He could not possibly endure to sit ever indoors, or drag his crippled body about among the houses of the manor. Not a day passed, but Eirik renewed his prayer to be allowed to bear the penance in his father's stead, and each time he felt it with a deeper thrill. Disablement, helplessness, inactivity, it made him afraid. For he knew a man cannot feel it otherwise than as a humiliation, a more bitter shame than being a dastard. Never before had he seen so clearly that of all vain glory the sweetest is that which springs from pride in one's bodily strength and perfect health. But none other than Eldred guessed that he laid upon himself penitential exercises. He had to use such measure that no one might observe any change in him in his daily work. Then his wife said to him one day, Now everything is otherwise than when we first met, Eirik. Then we were driven on by such desires as are kindled by hate and anger and scorn. I will speak no more of it now, but you must know that I am willing, whenever you wish that our life together shall come to an end." "You must consider well, Eldred," said her husband quietly. "What you have in mind would be a good issue, but not unless we are both agreed upon it."